So Hare Mai, welcome everyone to the Common Ground event with Wayshaper, and we have our guests Jim and Blase joining us this evening. Common Ground, I established it about 2 years ago. It's a social enterprise to enable connected, affordable, and sustainable housing communities that are community focused, community led, or in collaboration with others. And the event is a way for us to upskill and get capacity in how to do these things, as well as networking, so we get a chance to know each other, meet people who have similar interests, and advance the projects that we want to do wherever we are. And just to let you know, Common Ground has a website, commonground.net.nz, where I share, I try to put as many resources as possible on there. I have the events. I've got a Women Revolutionizing Housing project. For professionals working in this space, I have a Housing and Service to Life consortium. There are lots of resources of published materials. There's lots of courses, and I haven't offered a lot myself, but I do have links to other courses, like from the Foundation for Intentional Community that I mentioned. So I would really encourage you to visit the commonground.net.nz website, sign up for the newsletter and whatever else you see there. Would like to run a women's retreat, and we would like to have a retreat on collective housing in the new year. So those are the other things that we're gearing up to do, and we're always looking for people who'd like to join in with those things. So welcome to the Common Ground Network and community, everyone. And so before we go into the poll, I thought we'll just have a quick introduction then to Jim and Blase, who are invited guest speakers for this evening. So Jim and Blase, would you please introduce yourselves?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, Jim Holt. I am, first and foremost, I'm a designer. I work across branding and digital graphic design, but more over the last few years, more involved with service design and product design. So rather than designing the look of the thing, designing the thing itself. And also have been involved and interested in community-led housing for about 6 or 7 years, in terms of forming a group in London. That fragmented into different groups, and that so far as I'm concerned, hasn't evolved into a home or homes yet. But during that time, I also worked with a group of friends to set up an intentional community. So I have some experience of the lived experience of setting up community, working out decision-making processes, working out conflict resolution processes, and lots of the software of community rather than the hardware of the buildings. And it was while I was being trained by Blase as part of the Community-Led Homes training program as an accredited advisor that I hit on some ideas or thoughts or perspectives on how we might accelerate the process for groups that are setting up. And that was when we started to work formally together on Wayshaper about 2 or so years ago. Yeah, that brings us to here.
Thank you. And Blase.
Yeah, hello. Welcome, everybody. So my name is Blase Lambert. I'm the Chief Executive of the Confederation of Cooperative Housing, which is the UK's representative body for cooperative and mutual housing organisations. I'm the Treasurer of Cooperative Housing International, which is the ICA's housing sector body. And I'm also a board member of the International Cooperative Alliance as of last week. So, yeah, as Jim says, I was delivering one of the days of our national training and accreditation programme that we established to create a network of advisors all over the UK, linking into regionalised support hubs. I was doing the day that looks at the different options and ways in which people can create community collaborative cooperative housing projects. And Jim came up to me at lunchtime and said, "This is all really very interesting, but I'm sure it works in your head how it all interacts with each other, but I think it would be useful for people with maybe a little less experience. I've been doing this for 25 years since I moved into a co-op, to have, you know, a tool that will help see how these options interact with each other, how decisions that you make over things like who will own the organisation, how it will finance itself, what its tenure options, etc., would be." And I thought, okay, well, let's run with this then and see whether there's some mileage to it. And here we are, couple of years later, as Jim says, we launched Wayshaper last year. It's been extremely popular in its take up in the UK. We've got just over 40 of our accredited advisors that have that have taken up licenses. And I hope that you'll find the presentation today and the opportunity to make comments and ask us any questions really helpful. And I think when we were creating this, and you know, I say we, my role was quite often during the COVID lockdowns with lots of prototype cards scattered all over my office floor here, trying to make sure that this was all going to work. And actually, you know, most of the clever work on this was done by Jim. But neither of us were thinking at that time of anything beyond creating something that would work for advisors in the UK. And I've found it really interesting and really an unexpected development that people in other countries have heard about this and thought, hey, there might be something there that could work for us. Okay, you know, some of the content might be different, but the principle is still the same. So as I say, I hope you find today's session really helpful, and I'll stop talking now, otherwise I'll just take all the time up waffling.
Thank you, Blase. It's so very interesting to hear how you all got to this point. I think that's really important to understand your own journey within the journey. And I know I am also going to speak for Ian as well. Ian's got his hand up there. That he and I really want to speed up. You know, that's what interested us about your tool, your toolkit, your process, the way you're doing it. We're about speeding it up because probably a lot of you have heard about in, you know, some intentional communities that just go on and on for maybe 8 years. They meet and meet and meet, taking ages to actually establish themselves. And it's a long drawn out process where a lot of people drop off, some new people come in, and then that's hard for everybody to have a housing project drag on for so long. So the efficiency of it, the speed, the clarity, the ability to see the big picture and move on it, that's, I know, what interests Ian and I about this tool, and what we would like, why it's so interesting for us to bring this here to Aotearoa, because collective housing as a whole is fairly new, and let's do the best we can with our housing crisis with so much housing need that we speed up this process. And for me, that's, you know, one of the big benefits. And of course, the collaborative element as well. So you get collaboration and speed. I think that's what I would say is perhaps my understanding of what Wayshaper's potential and its secret sauce. So now I'm going to hand it over to you two, the creators of this toolkit and process, to tell us. I'm going to put the view on speaker view. So we have you. If everyone else can just put yourselves on mute for our speakers, and then they get the full screen in the recording. Everyone else, please put yourself on mute.
Great, thank you. Well, thanks to everyone for coming, and really interesting to hear where everyone's at with their stage. This is the toolkit. This is one of the toolkits. We have it in 2 sizes. So there's a large size for collective work around a table. There's a small size, and we developed this one because we were developing in the middle of a pandemic. And we realized that people needed a small set they could set up on their dining room table rather than a big set which they put on a conference table in a meeting hall. So this is the 2 boxes that contain the cards that I'm going to go through in a minute on the decks. It seems that, well, in my view, this toolkit really takes the place perhaps in the middle of the process of developing a group, where the very early part is establishing what your shared values might be, what your shared vision might be, what really matters to a group, what it is that underlying everything that holds the group together. And that's the kind of thing which emerges just through talking with friends and understanding, and a decision-making process coming out of that. The toolkit that we've got here is more likely to slot in once you've got that sort of initial shared values basis organized, but at the same time this toolkit can help to reveal other things that may not have been considered, but it's another step along the way. And then beyond that, then you've got other issues, which are how to actually go about building your property, building in sustainability into the property. That's something that we're dealing with as a next toolkit, which we're working on right now. So this is the kind of middle part of the sandwich, if you like. And I would imagine that most people here would probably would really find it useful to do that vision and values process first, and also decide on what kind of decision-making process might be taken into account. So I'll just jump to a screen now, if I can find it somewhere. Here we go. So hopefully you can all see a blue screen now. Great, okay. And just to check that it is actually moving through, can you now see a white screen? Great, okay, thank you. We can share this deck afterwards anyway, so that you've got our contact details. I've just talked a little bit about what we've mentioned on this slide, so I won't dwell on that for too long. Some of the research that we did early on, we had prototype sessions and workshops with people. These are just a couple of the quotes that came out, and essentially it showed that we were achieving what we'd set out to do, which was to simplify and accelerate the process of creating a group model. And by group model, we mean the way in which the group will rationally organize itself, from finance to what sort of land they're going to build on, to how they want to arrange themselves from a governance perspective, all of those components. So before actually starting to dig a hole in the ground or lay bricks, what are the rational components that go up to sort of lock everything together, that mean they can move forwards in a meaningful way. So the design, I'm going to rush through this fairly quickly because I think people will have more questions than we'll present here, so we can sort of move through it and then have that discussion. So the design and the development, after the initial observation, and that initial observation was that there's a lot of interdependencies. So out of all the different things that you can consider when trying to look at how to create some community-led housing, a lot of them depend on each other or are incompatible with each other. And so you might make a particular choice over a particular type of finance, and that may rule out a particular type of governance or a particular type of delivery model. So these issues seem to be something that didn't initially arise until later in the project or later in the development of a group. And so that was our first intention. But we wanted to dig in a little bit further as well and say, well, what is the actual experience for groups and for advisors when they're doing this? And we picked out, amongst 44 groups, we picked some that were emerging, and they were very hard to find because they're just not visible, because they're sitting around in a cafe or a pub talking, and they're not talking about it on the internet. Some which were more structured and organized and had gone through quite a bit of the process that Wayshaper tackles. And then some who had been established for quite some time. So looking at different maturities of groups, and then also the accredited advisors that have been working with them, which are accredited by Blase and community-led homes, and to understand best practice and the kind of problems that they saw they saw groups are having. So once we conducted those surveys, that gave us a good sample of groups and advisors to go in and do more in-depth interviews. I think we did 6 of those in the end. And that was us asking them questions and trying to really root around in those problems that they expressed, or in areas that they found that they had particular success, and find out how that happened. So we were finding out best practice. And then we prototype tested with those groups as well. So we were able to take feedback from them and just see the thing working. And as I say, we were doing this through the pandemic. So we were doing a lot of the testing online. So we were probably testing it in the most difficult circumstances you can, when you've got people sitting on different Zoom calls with different sets of cards, or the same set of cards, but in different rooms. So the insights that we gained out of the research were primarily a limited view of options. So I mentioned the interdependency of these options. We've got 70 different options in this toolkit across 16 different categories. And many groups perhaps hadn't considered what they were going to do with long-term management, for instance. It just wasn't on their radar. And although it might not stop them from developing their group initially, it would certainly come up to bite them sometime later. And it would be a problem they'd have to look at, and probably looking at it too late. And so there was a tendency to copy other people's models. There's an organisation in the UK called LILAC, which stands for, go on Blase, I always forget this. I can't remember. Liverpool.
Low impact leads. I can't remember what the A is.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've quoted that.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, if you look at Lilac Co-housing though, they're held up as a really amazing example of how you can create a model that suits them. And the reason being that they had people with higher equity, people with no equity, some owning, some renting. And so it's a really interesting model that they built, quite complex model. And most people would say, oh, we want to do a Lilac. Oh, and it's going to be super sustainable as well. And it's going to be in a city, it's going to have a pond, without really considering whether that was a particularly good model for themselves. Similarly, there are others that are quite famous. Ouch, which is the old women's co-housing community in London, took a long time to put together. 15 years they took to get to actually having somewhere to live. So there's that one particular problem is there's just not the options laid out on the table. So physically, we've decided to create a toolkit which puts them all out on the table where you can see them. The second, well, the incompatibilities that I mentioned. And what might happen there is that a group might make a few choices about a few key things that were essential to them. And then some way down the line in 6 months say, oh, we've made a bad choice because we can't do the next thing we want to do because of some earlier decision. And so it's about bringing up all those incompatibilities right from the start. Site-led decision making. So particularly in urban areas in the UK, where groups are picking or developing their model around a particular site. One group in particular lost a site and then had to essentially revamp their entire model. So we've got
Sorry, Jim, we're getting a feedback loop, which I think is coming from Kim. So Kim, could you mute, please, because we're getting everything we're saying about. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, one particular group where they needed to take a larger piece of land, and suddenly they needed to involve a housing corporation, a housing cooperative, housing association to help them with that. So it meant having to rewind their model back to that particular decision, which with Wayshaper is relatively straightforward, but they were unpicking a nest of different decisions. So that's become more of an issue with urban groups anyway. And also the option for just iterating that model over time. So, you know, maybe more equity flows into the group and you might want to iterate that and change that particular model. And uneven knowledge and understanding. So even with the group that I was in, knowledge started to get a bit siloed, and that was mainly because we appointed or self-appointed within the group who would look after what parts, but that did mean that they ended up holding all the knowledge and then trying to explain it to us and on a higher level. And so we looked at how we could create a more simple and broad understanding across the group so that we're looking at full participation and much more agency across the group. And also in some cases, some people had less time than others. There was a single mum that I was thinking of that would find it quite hard to contribute enough time and was having to kind of make decisions off the back of other people's research. And so again, I felt that having something that everyone would be able to partake in a simple and accessible way would help to even out that knowledge and even out that decision-making process. And then, of course, as you mentioned, Zola, groups that develop slowly can lose momentum and fall apart. I mean, that seems to be pretty common, I think, and I'd be interested to know what the stats are behind that and how many groups fail simply out of not having enough velocity, enough momentum. So we're looking at accelerating that process. And then, yeah, remote meetings. So while we were in the pandemic, of course, there was no choice. But through the research, we discovered that quite a few of the advisors would like to continue doing remote meetings after the pandemic because it meant that they could cover more ground, reach more people, have more meetings. Obviously, they still enjoy and want to do face-to-face, but it meant that they would be able to broaden their reach somewhat. Less so with the groups because they tended to be friends and they want to build that kind of cooperation amongst themselves, and that's completely understandable. But again, you know, if someone wasn't able to make a meeting in person, they can still partake because they've got a small set of the cards that they can access. So everyone's on the same page at the same time. So this led to some design pillars, essentially some things that we wanted to build in. Exploration, so a full exploration of all the options in a simple and accessible way. Information, so we wanted to not bulk out the card experience, the playing experience with too much content. We wanted people to be able to swiftly move through the rough decision-making process, but then be able to fall back onto an online resource, an online information resource linked to each card. And that includes case studies as well as rules and pieces of information that you could use in building a model. The holistic planning, making incompatible options clear from the start. So allowing a group to really take an overview and look at every aspect of it and how those relate together rather than piecemeal planning and then having to rewind. Participation, just mentioned, the uneven knowledge across the group. So encouraging everyone to speak and everyone to be able to see the full range of options, and acceleration. So these are really just what, if we achieve these things, then we've answered the research findings. So the toolkit is essentially this physical toolkit, but also a workshop process. It comprises instructions on how to run a workshop and instructions on how to use the cards, and some guidance there as well for whoever's facilitating the workshop. So if that wasn't to be an advisor, but if a group is facilitating themselves, there's some guidance on that. The 16 priority workshop cards, which I'll talk about in a minute, it's two stages of workshops. 70 options cards, and then link to those option cards online resources, which currently, the way that it's working in the UK, those are available under a 12-month subscription. So you can keep the cards forever, but your subscription will run for 12 months, and that means that we've got the revenue to maintain that and update it. And so, during that subscription, if one of the cards becomes updated, if there's a new piece of legislation, we can send out that card to every subscriber without them having to pay any more. Maybe keep on top of it and make sure it's relevant for them. And the instructions, as I mentioned, they're fairly detailed, and hopefully they help people understand how to best facilitate something. So there's a little bit of guidance in that. One thing this doesn't really include is how you go about deciding on a decision-making process. As I say, I think that's like a step before this. But it is important to do that, and I mean, for any group who wants to organise themselves, whatever decision-making process it is, whether it's one person making all the decisions or the whole group, but as long as it's decided and agreed upon. So as I mentioned, two-stage process. Firstly, a group priorities workshop, followed by group options workshops, and that can yield anything from a complete model. More likely, it will yield questions which a group will then have where they need further information, and that's the point at which they can consult with an advisor, and it really helps them to understand which parts they need more help and more support with. Or alternative models, so the encouragement here is to develop a number of models and look at how they all fit together, look at how each one serves the group best, so they can try out different approaches rather than just going down one particular avenue. So the first priorities workshop, or the first workshop, is all about priorities. And this was something that groups said was really interesting in helping to bring out discussion about things they hadn't really thought about. So there's some obvious things like ownership and perhaps the delivery model. So a lot of people want to be mutual home ownership, or they want to be a cooperative, but there's a number of different delivery models that could be considered. But then there's other parts, organising principle is that softer side. Is there an intention behind the group, and do they want to preserve that above and beyond anything else, which might then preclude other choices that they want to make. But these priorities all locked together, once they've been considered, mean that the group has considered all aspects that would need to be taken into account. This is just two examples of those priority cards, so there's 16 of these cards. The first one, as I mentioned, is that softer. It's a question: is the group led by an ethos which they'd like to protect? So this might be an all-vegan group. It might be an all-women's group, and that would be something that would be perhaps at the higher level of their vision, depending on that initial visioning and values process. And then on the one on the right, much more technical, and that's the delivery model card I mentioned. So there's a whole range of delivery models. And for someone or for a group at a very early stage, that might not be clear for them, and so this process is to help them understand what all those different options mean and what the implications are of them, and those will be outlined on the options cards. And so you'll see at the bottom, it'll say, for organising principle, go to cards 4 to 5, so you know where you're referring to, and this will become a bit clearer in a couple of slides. So early group discussions of priorities would involve all the cards laid out, and the group taking each one in turn and discussing them. And there might be quite strong opinions about some, which they can put to one side, and less strong about others, or less knowledge about others, which they can put to another side. But the point of that discussion is to really organise those groups into a set of priorities. So from high priority, mid priority, and essentially low priority is anything they're not really so worried about at the moment that it doesn't figure very highly in their vision. But this process in itself really helps a group to understand what they want to achieve, what's important, where the differences lie, where there might be some people who want ownership and other people want to become renting tenants. So there's a lot of discussion that comes through this, and just this alone I think is really helpful in fleshing out part of that vision. It doesn't necessarily go into do you want green space? Do you want play areas for children? Those are more early stage sort of components. So this wouldn't really encompass those sorts of questions. So following that initial workshop, so we've got priorities sort of worked out, we go into group options workshop. And that previous workshop, it might take one go, it might take several goes. It really depends on the maturity of the group. These are the options cards, and the instructions are to lay them out as you see, which is quite a big space, but it allows all of the cards to be seen at once. And essentially what we're going to try and do in the workshop is work through each of these sets of options. So you'll see their color coded, and each one relates to a different one of those priorities. The first three are about residents, the dark green ones, the light green ones are about the organizing principle. And so our first priority in this fictional group is organizing principle. We've decided, for instance, we want to be an all vegan community, let's for instance say, and so we then look at the options related to that. And the options are a private or intentional community for the core organizing principle, or it could be open to the wider community and to local council allocations. So they want to be very inclusive and open and not protect a central ethos other than being open and inclusive. Just a quick zoom in on one of those cards to make it easier to see. So you can see we've got some, again, it's meant to be brief information. This isn't meant to dive into too deeper a way at this point. Some groups have said it's really helpful to have an advisor with them during this process, and so it's very useful for advisors. They've said it's helped them smooth through things. I think that generally is the case because of some of the questions, perhaps not this question, but some of the other questions become a bit more technical. But we've put some pointers, so there's a green tick for what this might be more relevant to, and an orange warning, so just something you might like to think about early on, that this would preclude certain things. And then we've got a list of incompatible options underneath that in red. So this will tell you which cards, if you chose card 4 as your organizing principle, which other options are precluded. And then below that you'll see a web address, so Wayshaper option 4, which you could type into a browser, and that will give you a full page with case studies and other information about this particular card. And likewise a QR code. I have never used a QR code in my life. I don't think they're useful mostly, but on this occasion I think it's perfect. And so you just point your camera phone at that and it will bring up the page. So imagining we've chosen card 4 out of those two, we now see the incompatible options. So they range from incorporation and governance and residence to tenure. And we have to then consider as a group, are we prepared by protecting our principle of being a private and intentional community, are we prepared to forego being a charitable incorporated organisation? Is that a risk? Is that an expense that we're able to take? Is that a loss that we can suffer? And it would be a case of going through each of these different incompatibilities just to determine that we're not ruling out something which we think is quite important. And if it is, then it's a case of reviewing that organising principle and seeing whether it's quite as high a priority as we thought. But imagining that we've decided, no, we're definitely vegan, we're definitely fine with those incompatible options, we want to proceed with that, we then return to the large deck and we turned over those incompatible cards. So we've taken them out of view. We haven't removed them because we might want to rewind this step in a couple of moves, a couple of priorities. And essentially, as you work through each of those priorities, all 16 priorities, at each turn, you will turn over more cards, and eventually you will end up with something that looks a bit like that. So you'll have 16 at minimum cards turned up, which give you the bones of the model that you're looking at. In some cases, you might have more than 16 because there are hybrid options. So you might, in some cases, you can combine two options together, and those are kind of noted on the cards anyway. So that brings you to a point of saying, okay, we've got something on the table we can look at. And as I say, there may have been at some point, there may have been a sort of like a wrong turn down the maze, and you may have had to rewind a bit, but it means you're rewinding in a workshop rather than as you're talking to a bank manager some months down the line. The considerations, as I mentioned, decision-making process, this came out in the research, and during the research, there were so many groups that said they didn't really have a decision-making process, even some that had built houses, or they didn't know what it was or how to name it. Many of the very early stage groups were working with sociocracy, which really distributes decision-making around the group. Well, it distributes the gathering of knowledge around the group into circles, but it also allows the group to speak and share in an open way. Great, yes, perfect. You can maybe talk about that a bit because I think it's really important. And it allows members of a group to express a concern with an idea, but to allow it to pass. They can also veto it as well. I mean, these are the very simple basis on which we used in the intentional community in which I lived. But that's something super important, and many groups didn't have it, and it'd be great to do a toolkit just about that. Online meetings, so I mentioned, additional sets of cards for remote participation. So while the toolkit we sell as one large master set, which can be used in a physical meeting, once this has been purchased, groups and advisors are able to buy as many of these small sets as they want at quite a low price, so they can bulk out and the whole group can have a set of cards for a quite affordable price. Yeah, tool is a diagnostic, so it's not necessarily going to answer all the questions, but it's going to answer all the questions about where the questions lie. So it helps the group to really know where they're going to need extra help. Yeah, changing legislation, as I mentioned, so any cards that are impacted over the 12-month subscription, we update, so we keep people's toolkits relevant and fresh. Oh yeah, community, as something we just touched on early on in this call. Groups expressed an interest in you being able to share ideas with others. So maybe at some point we might create some sort of forum where groups can share their models, ask questions, explore how each other's been getting around certain things. And that brings us to the end of that. As I say, I can share this deck so that people have got that. And Blase, you may have some things you wanted to add as well alongside that.
No, not really, Jim. I think you've covered the journey, the process, how the toolkit works, and I'm just happy to hear comments and take questions from the people that are here, really. But no, I think you've laid it out as it is, and really over to the attendees, really.
We've got some questions. Oh, okay, yeah. I'm seeing if there's anything on the side here.
Yeah, so we can open it up then to questions. Yeah, so I had because I'm at the emerging stage also. So I got this book, Who Decides, is exactly what you were saying, because I want to figure that one out to begin with. And also just what you were saying about the vision and the mission for any one individual. I've just taken a course called Starting a Community with the Foundation for Intentional Community. And I think if anybody is interested to do this as a founder, someone who wants to sort of start leading the process, that this starting a community really does have those values, looking inside oneself. What do I need to start with for myself before I can then start to engage with others? And I think that you were saying that there needs to be some things happening before the toolkit actually is engaged. And yeah, so I just thought that's been quite useful for me at this point to do that work as well.
Yeah, the priorities cards can certainly prompt people to think about things that may not have been at the forefront. But as I say, I think there's a other level of exploration of vision which this doesn't so much tackle, and I think it would be great to do an additional toolkit. So I've talked briefly about this with Blase, whether we could make that an open source free reference. It really depends how much time and input we're going to have to make on something like that, or it may be something we could collaborate with someone on. But I think
and I can share with you, because I've just finished doing the course. It's an on-demand course, so I went through it and got the resources and have found it so useful. So I can share with you about that. So we can look at, yeah, could a toolkit actually be useful for that part of the process as well? But so let's open it up. Oh yeah, sorry, Blaze, you go ahead.
I think the one thing I'll say quite quickly is that our smallest member has got one house and 4 people living in it. And our largest member's got 13,500 homes. And, we've sought to create something here that enables people to do community-led housing at all sorts of scale. And coming back to the point about decision making, there are ways in which small groups make decisions. There are ways in which organizations with thousands of members make decisions. And I think what we wanted to do with this toolkit is say, actually, that's something that people need to work out for themselves first. Now, certainly we can provide, and indeed one of the web pages on Wayshaper on the website provides information about those different approaches to making decisions. But it's almost like a group of options in itself. You can either make decisions by consensus, you can make decisions by what I call supermajority, where you require a certain high percentage of people to be involved in the decision and to agree to it. You can make decisions by simple majority. If you are 5 people looking to live together in an intentional community, you probably want to all agree the basics. If you're setting something up across a village community or a town community with 2,000 members, the idea that every single one of them has to sign off on every single decision probably means you're never going to get anywhere. So it's really important to choose the right decision-making process and have everybody comfortable about that. But I think certainly we can look at something to bolt on at the front end of Wayshaper that helps people with that before they go into because you have to have decided how you're going to decide which options to choose before you start thinking about which options to choose. So it's an important pre-decision, so to say, but there are a variety of different approaches to that. And even in the small scale, I say to people, so I sit with 10 people in there, so we're going to make every decision by consensus. And I say, okay, well, that's a great starting principle, but what happens when somebody refuses to pay to live in the scheme? And they go, oh, so we couldn't get rid of them unless they agreed. I said, yeah, so this person doesn't pay rent for 3 years. And you've decided that all of your decisions will be made by unanimity. Well, I ain't paying and I ain't letting you do anything about it. And even within those super small groups, there are times when they will need a different decision-making process that allows the interests of the community to overwrite the interests of the self-interested individuals, shall we say, in certain situations. But certainly, it's something, as I say, that we can look at as we develop further parts of this product over time.
Yeah, and I think part of what why I'm bringing this here to Aotearoa and New Zealand and Australia as well is because we actually need to know what is involved without going into it too rosy-eyed or half-baked, where we end up over our heads quite quickly. And so if this toolkit seems like it's something that would be really useful in these countries, I'm quite keen to put some funding, a proposal together, because it is quite a lot of work. Even though Blaze and Jim have done so much work, you'll see the back end of it with all those resources, as he was saying about legislation. When that changes, the card might change, or the back end of the resource. And there's a lot of work that would be that back end for New Zealand or Australia that needs to be developed by professionals. And that's what we need if we're going to make this toolkit work for these countries. I'll speak for this country because this is where I am, that we do need to have some money behind the professionals who will be able to do the research and upload that onto the website. The Wayshaper website exists, but we need an Aotearoa version. So those of you who are attending this evening, if this is something that you think would be really useful for this country, or if you're in Australia and you'd like to speak for that, yeah, do please be in touch with me. I'll send something afterward to be able for you to give maybe a little bit of a statement that, yes, I think this is important and why. and then I can use it as part of a funding proposal. So that was just a little bit of why I think it's important that people really listen quite closely and feel that if it is going to be relevant, that they are able to express that relevancy. So yeah, what questions would you have to Blase and Jim that would help you to understand its relevancy to collective housing in Aotearoa or Australia?
Can I maybe just say something whilst questions are piling in, which is I think the point that you were just making there about the creation of the resources is important. I mean, from our point of view, we can create a replicable version of Wayshaper for yourselves at fairly low cost. You know, we've done all of the market research and the product development end of things. What we were able to bring to the table beneficially in the UK is several decades of creation of resource. So we already had a lot of the resource that sits behind those QR codes and sits on those web pages. That's the bit that it seems as if there's the need for more creation at your end. Hence the point that you're making, Zola, about the fundraising element of this is primarily to make sure that all the supporting resources are there. We can create, as I say, the toolkit fairly low cost for you, but then all you're going to have is a set of cards, and the resources are a really important part of it.
I can briefly share a page actually, just briefly show that web page. I did touch on that. If I can find it. Sorry, 1 second. So yeah, with a subscription, it would bring you into the information resources, and it's each of these is linked to a card. So the 16 priority areas, and then each one with its linked card information. So either access by typing in a web address or through a QR code using your camera phone. And then that goes into, oh, we're not logged in. Okay, I'm going to have to log in first. Right. If I go into one of the incorporation and governance, so there would be quite a bit of common information in the back end, but of course lots more local and national stuff. So this is that particular page on incorporation governance, and there's some downloadable resources, so some rules, model rules, and one case study. And most pages have a case study video or a PDF in this case, and some practical information and some guides, and some of that is existing government guidance. So we've linked off to a government portal, or it's work that, as Blase was saying, has already been created by, in this case, the CCH or one of the partners involved in this over here. And so it's not exhaustive. So it's still trying to help you move through this process in a relatively swift way, but it heads off all the kind of the typical areas that you need to know about. So that, I guess, really it's about letting you know the known unknowns. So just making you aware of what you might need to go into further research, but this gives you enough information to quite quickly rule in or rule out particular options without bogging you down. So again, looking to foster acceleration and simplicity, but pointing you towards the more detailed information. Or, in the case of something that needs a lot more expertise on, looking to engage with an advisor.
Hi, sorry, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk or not, but
yes, we're in question session, so anybody who's got a question, go ahead and just ask it. You're welcome.
Brilliant. So basically what I'm understanding is, as the toolkit, you have all your basic ideas, or the stuff that probably most Kiwis dream about and idealize about and think about as a general rule, but you then have a lot of the rules, regulations, councils, information, stuff like that is what I'm gathering, which is what I find is the group that I'm in that are thinking about producing a small community. Probably that's most information we need, is like about what rules and regulations in New Zealand in particular is what we need to focus on, I guess, because I'm finding it difficult, because one website government wise will say one thing and another thing would say another thing, and I get a bit confused because I'm not very computer literate. So that's why the cards interest me, because it kind of looks very kind of set out. This is where you go for this kind of information for this country. So you're saying that yours is for the UK, is that correct? And that we're still developing, or in the process, or the idea of wanting to develop one for New Zealand. Is that correct? Yep. Okay. So do we have an idea of potentially how long or when that may be able to be? Yeah, like Pamela's like, I don't know. But yeah, is that, would that take years? Like, how long did it take to develop basically the UK version? And I know we're a smaller country. I'm hoping because there's a baseline, would it only maybe potentially, I know there's no absolute thing, but would it potentially only take like a year? Or are you looking, do you think it would take many years, or
A lot less. I think we probably took about a year to develop the first one, but much of that was working out the mechanic, the design, testing it, researching it, and then pulling the content together, and Blase writing content and then building the website. So there's quite a bit in there. Obviously not a year of like 5 days a week, but as Blase said, that all of those mechanics and structure are now created. The missing part is the content inside it and the interdependencies, and maybe there's one card missing, or maybe there's 2 cards that need to be removed, and therefore the whole deck, the interdependencies in the whole deck slightly change. So it's really a case of understanding that the on the ground conditions there and the legislation. That's a little bit harder for us because we're not based there. As I say, some content would carry across and wouldn't be nationalized, others would be, and so I wouldn't imagine a year. I think probably the larger obstacle is maybe gathering partners together and funding and things like that. This was funded by, well, the CCH, wasn't it, Blase, but with support of some partner organisations in terms of presenting some of their content to help with case studies. Yeah, it's. I don't think a year anyway. It would really depend on tapping into that local specialized knowledge, and if there's if for instance the government or sort of state in New Zealand want to encourage home ownership and home building, and if you've got the same housing crisis that we've got here in the UK, then there might be some interest at higher level in how to help groups do this for themselves rather than relying on developers.
Yes, well, we do have the Housing Innovation Society, which is our advocacy group, but they're also a registered nonprofit who can channel funding for initiatives like this. So I met with you all about a month ago, and then I have put the proposal to the Housing Innovation Society to say, if I got enough interest, like if we had this presentation and people gave their testimonials that yes, this is something that they feel is worthwhile to get developed, then the Housing Innovation Society would help us to look for the funding. Somebody had asked, Karina, I think, had asked about the Papa Kainga. Oh no, sorry, it was Kim. Asked about, so we have in Aotearoa, the Maori have their own land, and on that land there is legislation, planning laws that allow them to develop in certain ways that are not applicable in the same way to non-Maori land. And there have been toolkits developed for folks who would like to develop Papa Kainga. Those, I have 2 of those downloaded on my computer. There might be more, because I think in each region of Aotearoa, there might be a little bit of differences, but there are sort of this flow chart or a step-by-step process for developing a Papa Kainga but the problem is that it's really only for Maori owned land, and for Maori where they own in collective ownership. So it's that, maybe that's one part of what could be developed, but for folks not on Maori land, it's not so relevant necessarily. So I was saying, yeah, go ahead.
So that just sounds to me like one of, maybe an additional card around the land ownership option. So if you're choosing that land ownership option, it takes you down a certain route. And that's essentially how Wayshaper works. In the same way, we have in this country, we have land owned by national parks, land that is greenbelt, land that is sites of special scientific interest. These are land options essentially, and you're just describing another land option that's specific to your country. And this is the gap. This is the piece of work that needs to be done to take what we've developed that's relevant to the UK legal and regulatory environment and make it relevant to your environment. As Jim was saying, mechanics of the product and the product design, we don't have to repeat that. Well, all that we have to do is get the content right with yourselves, and that should be a fairly straightforward and not time-consuming piece of work. It will move at whatever pace you can make it move at your end, really. I mean, as Jim said, in the UK, my organisation, the Confederation of Cooperative Housing, put its own funds up front to make this happen because we have funds and because we see this as a core part of why we exist. It's about helping people who are essentially going to become our member organisations in time to get their housing schemes to completion and for them to move in and be living there. Can I just pick up quickly also on a couple of the questions that I've seen posted before they get lost in the sort of broader chat? So firstly, Monty, are you happy for me to respond broadly rather than, because you've sent me a personal question here, are you happy for me to respond broadly?
Sure, that's fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, so the long-term costs, which is what you're talking about. So you're asking, is it important to have some kind of income stream once an eco-village is set up and running? Absolutely. That's the long-term management. And too often we find that groups get over-focused on the what are we building rather than thinking about how do we maintain it and run it once it's built, and don't do enough factoring of those long-term running costs into their financial models. And quite frankly, with a different hat on, fairly hard-nosed bankers like I went to university with, take one look at a financial plan and go, well, this is garbage, because in 5 years' time it's going to be falling apart because you haven't got any money to maintain it. So absolutely those long-term running costs are a key component of this, and why that's one of the key priority areas across the option toolkit is what we refer to the total process, a journey, if you like, that starts with the formation of the group, that moves through the finding and securing a site to either develop homes or refurbish or repurpose property, through to the getting the formal sign-offs in terms of the approvals, the planning applications, the approvals that need putting in place, through to the building it, through to the living in it. And that fifth stage of the total process, the live stage, is the bit that so many groups at the start don't pay enough attention to. So yes, that's really important. And Pamela asked a question about whether local councils and other housing organisations are using Wayshaper. And yeah, I mean, I have just over 30 of the accredited advisors are local authority, local council officers here in the UK. We have development staff within some fairly large housing associations. And yes, this is not just for use by advisors and groups that are at the, if you like, the coalface end of this. It's also for other partners who are enabling the development of different types of community housing projects. And we're in discussion right at the moment with faith-based organisations in the UK, primarily the Church of England, about, so if you take that land question and say, right, let's use sites that are owned by the church. So you take out of the equation the option related to how do we find the sites, because you've already got it. But then, you know, how does the Church of England act as an enabling partner, like a local authority might do, in helping communities to develop homes on land that is owned by the church and long leased to them, for example? So yeah, you know, we're finding all sorts of other stakeholders are coming to us and saying, hey, we can make use of this, or can we just get you to make one little tweak here to an additional card that we might need, and then it runs really well for us. So yeah, you know, we're not narrowing the if you like, the categories of people and organisation that could make use of this toolkit. We're trying to make it as relevant and applicable to as many different routes to doing community empowerment in housing.
Thanks for that, Blase, because kia ora everybody else. Our local council has they've put out a survey to our community here in Otaki, and they are interested in the idea of a community land trust entity. And I'm, as a resident here in Otaki, I'm not sure of their ability to see this through. I think that they lack the confidence and innovation, and I think they'll you know, stumble as much as and halt the whole thing. But it's right at the beginning stages, and it's so exciting. And I think that they would welcome something like this. It's creative. It's so applicable in so many ways. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to listen to just one person on the council who knows everything about housing or whatever. It's includes everybody, which I really, really love. And especially for people who might not speak up for themselves. I think that just by putting your hand out and grabbing a card speaks for you sometimes. If you don't want to speak publicly.
is to present it on the table. I think I can't remember who it was now said they're not particularly computer literate, but yeah, it's just about making it as accessible as possible, putting it on the table so that there's no hidden decision making or hidden understanding or something going on between two people in the group and the others aren't privy to it. You know, that it's all clear what has to be considered. How deep people want to go into that's another matter, but it's all out on the table, literally.
I think that, you know, I mean, firstly, Pamela, I think that's really great feedback, and thank you for that. I mean, I think, you know, what we're hoping and what we're finding in reality that this is doing is it's democratizing these decisions. And, you know, too often, you know, I've a lot of the work that I do is about going into long-established community housing projects that have got themselves into difficulties and troubleshooting and assisting them to find ways out of that. And too often I find that problems are driven by what I call by governance by the last man standing. In other words, the person who stands up the most and talks the most and keeps on talking and keeps on talking. Eventually, everybody just give up and they just go with whatever this demanding individual goes for, and there's an imbalance of power in that sort of situation. And you know, anything that basically flattens out that power dynamic, I think is really important. And as I say, if this, you know, helps you know, balance that out, because everybody, in the same way as, you know, with the card and the QR codes, each member of the group has the same access to the same resources. Jim was talking about this idea of becoming overly reliant on the one person who goes away and reads all the research documents and then tells everybody else what to think. Again, you know, something that moves towards saying, you know, here's the access for everyone to this information, so we can all make informed decisions, I think is the right direction of travel. Zola, you're muted. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I was just saying you're welcome to ask your questions. You can unmute or you can give it in the chat. And Blase, maybe you have questions that were directed at you or Jim. I wouldn't.
I've picked those up actually. Yeah, I think I've picked those up.
Okay.
It generally seems as if everyone's very supportive in the chat, which is great news. So, I think from our point of view, we're ready to go on this, if and when it's the right time for yourselves, really. I mean, I'm like I say, when we first launched this, and colleagues of mine, in Cooperative Housing International started going, "Oh, you've created what? Can we have a look at that?" And then people in other areas more broadly beyond that started saying, "Oh, that sounds quite interesting." It's an unintended consequence of primarily the work that Jim did on this, and we're really pleased that other people in other countries see the value to this, and just let us know when you want to move on, really.
I was going to say, I guess the next big question, I don't know if Zola's organizing this or talking with you separately, so don't feel obliged that you have to answer at this point or anything, but what kind of monetary component do we need to raise or put in to be able to then create a Aotearoa New Zealand type version of these amazing sounding cards?
I mean, as I say, and Jim, I'll stop talking in a moment because you've probably got more of the detail on this. But from our end, there isn't a great deal of cost. And when I say a great deal of cost, I'm meaning not running into the hundreds of thousands of dollars in terms of your currencies. So from our end, because we've already created the if you like, the product and the market research, the website development, the branding, all this stuff, we've done that already. So that doesn't need to be replicated. I mean, you might want, different color using on a particular card, but these are really straightforward things to deal with. The main cost element for yourselves, and I can't estimate that, is creating the resource that's specific to yourselves that will sit behind the QR codes on each of the web pages. And that's a question of what have you already got and where are the gaps? And how much will it cost to create the content to fill the gaps and how much time? Now that's the bit that I can't estimate, but certainly from our end, we're not sitting here looking at massive time and massive cost. But Jim, maybe I'll let you say a little more around the specifics there.
No, I agree. It's that entirely. The production. I mean, if you just look at the producing sets of cards like this, printing them, creating instructions and boxes, it's not hideously expensive. The cost is in developing the content that goes inside them and making sure that on each card we've got the correct. You probably can't see it, but the correct interdependencies at the bottom, the correct content on the website. And that's something which is not something we can do easily from this side without becoming more or somewhat expertise or having some expertise in the on-the-ground conditions in New Zealand. Of course, with Blase having his knowledge over here, that was the resource, for building most of the content in here or existing content. The unknown part is how do we create that for New Zealand and how much of it needs to be recreated? So a lot of it's relevant across the board. In some cases, it's adding in extra cards. In some cases, it's just changing some of the legislation. So there's a little bit of an unknown quantity there. But once that's done and once content is on the website, printing, I mean, these were printed in the UK. We could ship them, but it's probably better to just print them in New Zealand. The printing and the production shouldn't be overly expensive. So the actual distribution of packs, price per pack wouldn't be so high. Here there was quite an investment to recoup from CCH. So the method of selling them here is a subscription that goes out primarily to an advisor. And the reason that we did this was really to encourage groups to engage with advisors and also as an advisor tool. The advisor toolkits are £300 for a year subscription, but within each advisor then gets a series of coupons which they can give away for free to groups and to startups, and they can buy their kits at a much lower price, I think about £50, and then they can buy additional sets of cards on top of that for, I think it was about 15. So, and I think the exchange rate at the moment is, well, I'm not quite sure, pound somewhat more than a New Zealand dollar, maybe 1.5
Probably
times.
2 to 1.
Right, something like that, yeah.
Probably 2
But
to
then,
1.
of
But
course,
ultimately,
there was quite a big
the
investment to recoup, wasn't there, on that initially?
there was, but that's because, you know, we had to lay out a lot of costs in terms of the product development and the website development, which again, you know, are not costs that need to be replicated. I mean, ultimately, the distribution model at your end, you know, will be something primarily driven by yourselves. We will charge you a fairly low cost license fee for access, if you like, to the intellectual property of this, but the, you know, the distribution end is a different discussion. Can I just pick up on another question from Pamela? So round cards, yeah, look, we can make the cards any shape you want. I think the thing to bear in mind is if you do make them circular, there may well be some knock on there in packaging costs, because either rather than having rectangle flat packed and then put together boxing, you'd have to have some sort of circular box, or else a circular inlay inside a square or a rectangle box. So it, you know, there'll be a bit of additionality there, but you know, the marginal cost relating to the individual unit package is quite small. I mean, you know, again, Jim did a lot of work sourcing supply chains relating to the packaging, and indeed it was one of the headaches that that was caused for me leading up to the launch date, was the supply chain for the boxing. And indeed, when we first went live, we went live with a slightly less jazzy version of the box, because there was delays in supply chains at that point in time. And you know, I think we've all got used to, you know, slightly stranger goings on in the last couple of years. But look, you know, tracking back, yes, we can make the cards any shape you like them. Or design them any shape you like them. You know, there's then a choice, as Jim says, as to whether you get them actually physically produced where you are, or whether they're produced somewhere else and shipped to you. And you know, you'll need to make a view both in terms of the cost impact of that, but also the footprint of whatever decisions you make, the carbon footprint relating to production and distribution options. But yeah, we can make them star shaped if you like, but as I say, you know, it will impact on the packaging.
I'll jump in there just to say that so Ian and he's here on the call, and Ju just jumped in as well, and I have been talking about the funding part of it, like how much do we think we've got already, how much do we think we need to pay experts to create the content, as well as doing things like conscientizing people, reaching out to the various entities that we think would find these cards useful beyond just future residents, and being able to pilot and test them out within this country. So there's, you know, money needed for each one of those things to pay professionals to do that. So we've kind of got a rough estimate of a budget, but for us, it was really needing that testimonial from folks to say that, yeah, this is really would be great because such and such reasons. And with that, that's what we need to put behind the proposal. And then I think we can find the funding for it. So whether it's, you know, 50,000 New Zealand dollars or 150,000, it's kind of, I mean, some of it could be crowdsourced, but I really don't think it should fall on the shoulders of only those people, you know, at the moment who get it. I think it really does need to come. Government is, the latest government policy statement released by the Housing and Urban Development Ministry did say that collaborative housing is something they really want to do, but again, they don't have a way to do it. So if we go to them and say, we need $100,000 to be able to really do this collaborative housing thing well, you know, I think the money we could find it even locally. There might be some nonprofits that would like to support it because they see, as you were saying, churches, this might be something they would like to use because they have land they really want to convert and they want to do it well. So yeah, the funding thing, it's really about putting the proposal together based on the need that we see from folks. But I did want to say that at the end of this, I'll be sending out a survey of what you thought about the presentation, what questions you still have, and then what you would like going forward. So that would be really helpful, that you can put these questions and your testimonial statements of the fact that you think it's useful, and then I can, translate that into the proposal, put that as questions to Blase and Jim, who can answer anything that I'm not able to answer, and then we'll, carry this forward. So I'm kind of your local, the Aotearoa point of contact. I could, help the Australian folks, but maybe Australia wants to go directly to Blase and Jim rather. But I'm putting my hand up as at the moment as the point person for being able to move this along in this country. But I did want to give
can I just pick up, because I can see there's a conversation flowing ahead that Kim started, and I'm quite keen to just make a comment before it starts disappearing off my chat feed. So first of all, this is not about building materials and design. So we very deliberately did not include this is an options planning toolkit for groups and structure, and the way that the organization works, and it's and rather than it being a sustainability toolkit. Now we are creating another toolkit at the moment that addresses the broad range of all of the sustainable development goals, but that is not what this toolkit is trying to be. And we very much wanted to create this for a specific stage of the group development process, and the process of creating financial plans, business plans, long-term management plans, rather than architectural drivers and design drivers. So I just wanted to highlight that point, but also to say we right at the moment are creating an SDG toolkit, which we're creating that so it's not one country specific either, and that more broadly links to the SDG milestones and targets that Cooperative Housing International agreed just over a year ago. So that's something that we'll be making much more widely available, but I just wanted to be clear that what we didn't try to do with Wayshaper is make it an all things of everything that you could possibly think about throwing into the mix. And indeed, it's a separate discussion for people to decide how big they want their home to be and what component parts they want it to have in, and how it will be heated and such things, rather than what's the right governance structure for them, how will they fund their scheme development, and such things. Wayshaper is much more about those basic questions of organization and governance and control, rather than it being about design and development.
Yeah, I can tune in there just in terms of maybe tack-ons, or the ways that if they do have an ecological or a social mission. So Robin Allison in Aotearoa runs a co-housing from wow to how, I think is the name of her presentation, and she then has those specifics. If there's a group that decides co-housings for them, it might be then saying, well, then now that you know that, Robin Allison's your next step. She's the one that really gets into that piece of if co-housing is your thing. If eco-villages are your thing, I'm an eco-village ambassador, and I've got access to the GEN cards, which is the Global Eco-Village Network, where it goes into regenerative development, regenerative housing, and that's a whole nother process that can be added on if that's what a group really wants to focus on. There's the Foundation for Intentional Community, which covers, again, if someone's a founder and really wants to think about how they play that role. And then there's around, again, the sustainability and ecology side, there's a process called the Living Futures, and they've got a Living Communities, I think, that talks about that ecological piece of it. So there's lots that I think in this country that we can say, well, if this is what you decide, then here's additional toolkits or additional advisors
and
that would.
Solar, And Zola, that's the content that sits behind each card. So
That's
if you
right.
choose to do an eco-village, that's the content that sits behind that card. If you choose to do a co-housing project, that's the content that sits behind the card. If what you're doing is building a block of social housing for people on low-cost rent, then that's what sits behind that card. Yeah. What this toolkit isn't the how do you do one of those cards. It's the how do you choose which of those cards is right for you. Yeah. And I think, I need to be clear about this. What this is not, we've not made predetermined decisions about how every housing development should be created, right? Because I don't believe every housing development should be created exactly the same and shouldn't be for exactly the same groups of people, because society isn't like that. It's about helping groups say, what are our choices? And then once they've made their choices, how is it signposting them to the resources that they need to be able to make that happen? So it's a much earlier stage diagnostic tool than I've already made up my mind of exactly how this thing's going to be and who's going to live here. Now, where are the resources for me to do that? That's not what Wayshaper is. It's about enabling people to make those choices and then signposting them to where's the information so I can do that. So that what people don't have to do, just very quickly picking up on one of the things Christina said, people come to me all the time and say, I spend a couple of weeks Google searching for everything I can possibly need to find. And, again, we're trying to speed things up for people. Yeah, but it's not for people who've already got 20 steps down the line and decided that they want to build, this like that with these people, for this group of people, for this age, for this community. Sorry, they're already way down the road in terms of narrowing their options down. So it's a much earlier stage diagnostic tool to get people to the starting gate.
I find that a really interesting comment, because it leads me to question, why did our local district council decide on floating a survey for a community land trust? How did they reach that decision? None of us here in Otaki, even though we may have participated in and put submissions in on what we would like to see, innovative options. I might have written something about community land trust as an option, but I didn't have all the other options presented in front of me. I only could know and put in what I knew about and connections to them. And I think that's what the council does. They pick up on one or two things from submissions and then sort of run with an idea in a linear way, rather than opening up the whole sort of big picture for everybody and what are the options that best suit us based on the needs survey. I don't know how they come to these decisions.
I mean, I think what public bodies are very good at doing is producing vanilla. So they see something that somebody's done, like ice cream. Yeah, so everything's vanilla flavour. Yeah. So they see something that somebody else has done and they go, oh, let's copy it. Yeah, they're not very good at either thinking for themselves or enabling communities to think and make decisions, and then basically doing what we want them to do. Yeah, I mean, we elect politicians, and it's almost like, I'll get a bit political here, but I sort of feel that a politician only really cares what I think every 4 years when they want to put an X in a box, and then they crack on and do what they want to do. And public bodies, that's what they do. They reach for what has somebody else done? What can we replicate? And actually, it's like the lilac example that Jim touched on earlier on. Just because something is the right option in one community for one population of people doesn't mean that it's the blueprint for absolutely every community all over the planet. And that what we should do is just copy what one community has done everywhere. Because the needs from even one village to another, one town to another, will be different. And what might be the right land ownership model, i.e. a community land trust in one environment, in the next project that you're working with, that's completely the wrong option. And it surprises people sometimes. People expect me to be a lobbyist that every scheme should be a housing co-op because my job is the chief executive of the trade body for them. I don't believe that. What I believe is, in certain circumstances, that's the right model for people. Let's help them do it. In other circumstances, a completely different approach is right for people. Let's help them do that. As you know, it's about a breadth, and this is really what Wayshaper is. It's a breadth of options, and presenting that breadth of options and empowering people and enabling them to choose what's right for them, and then signposting them to the how do you do that resources so they can get on with it, rather than either somebody else on above us deciding what they're going to allow us to do, or people making ill-informed decisions or just trying to replicate what somebody else has done because nobody's enabled them to think for themselves and be empowered to make their choices. Anyway,
Yeah, and I think
sorry, as I said right at the start, if you don't stop me, I'll talk all day.
And I think this is right. And I think that, yeah, I wrote the report for Hamilton for a community land trust, and it was a 75 or 80 page report, but I was quite specific as to why and whatever for, you know, for Hamilton, where I was living at the time. I was on the ground doing my research. I was a community-led development professional. And yes, but again, it's only serving a certain kind of a population and in a certain way. And I think that having this breadth for local government and also central government to see, and then I've just finished writing a report on enabling housing for ethnic women and also women. But I mean, it's a report and it's 105 pages. Who wants to sit through and read that? So this toolkit, basically, there's so much of what is in the toolkit is in my report, but it's not a very accessible or participatory way to get the information. So this toolkit is a wonderful way to bring to life that which we know are the options, but in a way that's engaging and with different groups of people who will pull out, oh, this one would be great for us and this one wouldn't be, and so on and so forth. So for me, I'm quite interested to get local government and central government to be more engaging and giving more options. And I see this toolkit as just as relevant for government, local and central, to be able to engage as it is for the future residents, because really future residents can want things all they want, and yet quite often there is regulatory stuff that doesn't allow them to actually move forward. So for me, it's almost like we need to start with central and local government, having them go through this toolkit, and then from there, they are excited to share this toolkit with their communities, you know, rather than the communities coming, you know, with the toolkit. This is what we decide we wanted. And local government's like, I don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, that's part of what I'm also on about. Ian is also the same as me with wanting really local government and central as well, but for them to really get the how to engage with community with so many different options. And we think this toolkit, that's why we're starting to put our energy into it, so that we can do this work with local and central government as well, because there's money that we need to get from them as well to be able to make this happen.